It's interesting because we'll all nod and say every department has a role in customer experience, right? You could be in finance, and it could be subscription management, it could be invoicing. Legal certainly has an impact on how we interact with our customers. So, who's the bridge internally? If you were to go and look up, do like a chat GPT or something, deep research, and talk about the prevalence of voice of the customer programs, you'll find studies by like McKinsey talking about how most companies falter at their voice of the customer programs. So who's in charge? Who's bringing all this together? Because I know for one, I didn't come in thinking I'm going to be a data analyst. I'm going to be like the guy in charge of data. Yet it's so important. We can't have fragmented silos of data. So how do we wrangle this beast called data?
Yeah, so wrangling the beast is a great way of putting it. But yes, it's not only like one individual, it's really getting together a group, an internal program within your company to get all the customer advocates together in one room. So here at Top Hat, we meet twice a week. Anybody in the company can join, and certainly you can still participate by listening and not necessarily contributing anything other than listening. Because I think ultimately, even if you are just listening, you are building that empathy muscle that is incredibly important. The individual stakeholders who do present or offer their suggestions and opinions, those individuals all are part of that customer advocacy group. So, what that looks like is for us, because I mentioned context building earlier on in the conversation, when we meet twice a week, we usually have one person who leads the conversation by presenting on something like either a project they're working on or anything that would impact the customer experience or anything that might be a great cross functional collaborative effort that, again, has an impact on the customer experience. Now, it may not always be an improvement. It could sometimes be a learning of what had happened, but it's an open forum, no judgment, and it's more like sharing those wins and learnings. And then again, that builds the empathy across the entire group to make sure that we're focused again, bringing full circle on the customer. If I recall the question correctly, it's not only a single person responsibility, it's definitely a large cross functional effort. And when we look at data and we look at all the data inputs, again, it's really about looking at what is going to make the most impact and focusing on that first. The rest will follow. Where many companies tend to fail around voice of the customer, not only because of information, this is so difficult to find and source, is that there's a lot of time spent, or companies that might mention they have a voice of the customer program, but the time is spent purely on looking at what the numbers are. And because of the sheer amount of data that is there, they might only either meet or report on the voice of the customer data or those inputs really like annually or semi-annually or perhaps even quarterly, which in my mind is not often enough because ultimately you have interactions with the customer all throughout every month, all years of within the business. So it's important to carry that conversation throughout the year as often as possible. Now, you may not want to meet every 2 weeks like we do at Top Hat. Maybe once a month makes more sense. But definitely you need to set the cadence where you're reviewing the data and actually closing the feedback loop when it comes to communicating some of those items, whether it's finally implementing that feature that's been highly requested, or really maybe putting a plan around a large frustrator that has come out with a recent release or something like that. So again, really looking at that data, focusing in on what's important, but also having that cadence in communication.
So I think this is pretty amazing. You tell me if I'm capturing what you said right here. It almost feels cultural from what you're saying inside of Top Hat that the different departments are meeting specifically around customer experience and sharing. There is a cultural collaboration and partnership to identify how do we improve our customer experience? How do we listen to the voice of the customer? Because if you do the research, customer voice and customer experience, they're intertwined. You can't take them apart from each other. Is that a good takeaway that you've kind of made it internally a cultural thing that you do?
Yeah, no, I think Steve, you hit the nail on the head there. And it really ultimately, in my mind, a voice of the customer program is how you're learning and how you're learning at scale. What sort of insights are you inferring from the information that is already readily available, whether you're using AI to source from the internet or whether you're just looking at internally your survey responses and content, regardless of how you're receiving that information, it's unifying all that together, telling that story, but also being able to learn from it. And being able to learn from that is going to not only improve your relationships with your customers, it's also going to improve your relationships with your peers, and then ultimately improve product quality, which also impacts support volume. And hopefully that means something a bit more manageable, but that also means that you have the opportunity again to improve the value of the support team. And that's why I feel like voice of the customer programs ultimately do need to be grounded within an individual who is within customer success or customer support.